Kia ora e te iwi, nau mai hoki mai to Under The Whāriki. I'm Tahu.
And I'm Anatola.
And today we're talking about Ira Rere, gender fluidity.
Yes, we are. And we have a beautiful guest with us today, and I'm going to get them to introduce themselves.
Tēnā tātou te whānau, ko Tangaroa Paul tōku ingoa, heri tēnei no te whare tapu o Ngāpuhi, no te whare tahi tō o muri whenua. Tēnā tātou.
Yeah. I was up muri whenua the other day.
True.
Yes.
Whereabouts?
It's
kind of
before
big.
Ahipara.
Just the far north.
Yeah. Ko ngā tikuri, te aupori. That was the one I learned. Okay. Right. Yes. So before, carrying on. Whakapapa.
I love it. I
Put
love
two Māori in the room and it's instant.
It's great.
Yeah.
I'll just be
Okay.
here. I'll just whatever you want.
We start with a game, paku whakamahana, icebreaker, so that we can get our gender fluids going.
Yes. I mean, I didn't know we had gender fluids, but beautiful.
Probably,
Let's make it fluids.
There's a lot of fluids going. There's a lot of fluids.
And the game is yeah, nah, or nah, yeah. So yeah, nah, or nah, yeah to a statement I'm about to read. You have to choose if you're on the yeah, nah, or if you're in the nah, yeah.
Kapai.
Kapo? Simple enough.
Kapai.
Staying friends with your ex. Yeah, nah, nah, yeah. Rāne.
Nah, yeah, I reckon. Well, I've seen it with people in my life, with, remaining somewhat. No, maybe, I need to really think about this. No, I reckon a lot of my friends who have had ex-partners have remained pretty good friends after the fact, but it's more been through personal growth.
Right.
I love that personal growth, right? Getting comfortable. I feel like it depends, right?
Yeah.
I hate not having a definitive answer, but I'm like, yeah, nah, yeah, maybe. I feel like it depends on context. Like, how did you break up?
Yeah.
Oh,
Was
yeah,
someone
of course.
was there actual real pain in the breakup in the sense where did someone hurt another person really badly?
Do you need it too?
Yeah, how, and
Yeah, it's always about the utu.
I feel like also were you friends beforehand?
Right.
Or was this like I saw you across the room and I was like, yes. You know? Yes.
Okay.
You know, like were you guys good friends? Did you grow up to I think all of these things play a part in whether that's a yeah, nah or nah, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Now that I've done a bit of growing to the naive age of 24, I've actually turned into nah, yeah. Unfortunately, it doesn't sometimes pan out that way, but I've always found I loved that person for such a long time, and I want to whakamana them and still show them that, just because we've went our different ways, I still love and respect you and your whānau.
I love
Especially for the people that they did so much for me, their whānaus. So, unfortunately, there's just been times where I've been the one who fucked up, so yeah, they didn't feel that way about me.
About you. Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah,
Right.
and it's all
also,
right.
how amazing that you're grown to a point where you're like, I fucked up.
Yeah.
And that's on me, but
Yeah.
I still have love, and that's the decision whether they
Yeah.
want to reciprocate or not.
Yeah.
That's growth, Tahu.
Yeah.
At your little small 24 age.
Young people.
Young people, eh? So young.
I hate it for you.
I love it. Amazing. So before we kind of get into the chunk of this corridor today, we're also going to do a little pop quiz as well to kind of follow on into the icebreaker to kind of test our knowledge and also where we're at, and then also kind of follow on better conversations about it, which I'm so excited for. So we're going to pull out our whiteboards.
Kapai.
And
Oh, cool.
yeah, we got whiteboards.
Pull them out.
They look fancy.
Right.
And I'm going to beat Tahu because
Oh, cool. We love a challenge.
me and Tahu are quite competitive in this little game, but we got this.
I love the preparedness of it. Kapai. All right, patai tuatahi. What is ira and its different forms? Oh. So it can be anything, really. Whatever you think we articulate as being ira or gender.
What does it mean?
Yeah. The terms that it represents, or the type of thing that it talks about. And it can also come from a different point of view. It could be te ao Māori worldview, Western ideologies, e rā momo mea.
I don't know if this is right, but we'll go with it. You good?
Yes.
I said fluidity of gender and sexuality.
Beautiful.
Human.
Human. Oh, I love that.
I love that, Tahu. Look at you.
beautiful. I love
No,
it.
no.
Already. Not your points.
That's what I had to deal with.
No,
It's so good.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
well, I like thinking of it like that because, especially with the more I've learned about our whakapono Māori,
Yeah.
and even with your ingoa being Tangaroa,
yeah.
it's so fitting for you. How
it
fluid, well, YA, they move, it's fluid. And, but for me, atua don't have gender. So having gender is being human. Yeah.
Do you want to swap chairs? Should we? Maybe you should interview. That's amazing. I totally agree. Like when you say the human gene, essentially, because I've always seen Ira as like gender or life principle, even things like Māori and stuff. But human, like we acknowledge you first and foremost as human before anything else, like sexuality, gender, identity. And I think from a whakaaro Māori point of view, it's definitely that. He tangata Māori, he tangata I te tuatahi. And then when we look at other forms of Ira, so we have Ira tangata, which is what we all have, and then we have Ira atua, our celestial, and even divine
Godliness.
Ira. Yeah,
in
godliness, and in us as well, and it can be manifested in a physical form.
Love
in a
that.
On.
You know, what is the difference between when people say takatapui and Ira?
Yeah, so like I guess back in the early 80s, I think 1986 was when the gay law reform happened in Aotearoa. And at that time, I think the rainbow community just needed something to sort of unite their community as a way of showing a united front. So back then, you know, a lot of our Polynesian communities came and gifted their terms towards what would represent them in the queer or rainbow idea. But at that time, Māori didn't really have a term. And I think for good reasons, but our scholars back in those days did the research, went to go looking for narratives of our historical recollections, specifically in the rangi kaheke manuscripts. There's a story that talks about one of our famous love stories in Te Ao Māori between Tutanekai and Hinemoa. But in this particular narrative, the writer, or Wiramu Te Rangi Kaheke, goes in to talk about Tutanekai's relationship with Tiki, and it was understood that they were really close male companions, and it didn't in any way in the narrative imply that it was sexual, but it definitely identifies, I guess in a modern day we'd call it a bromance, you know, and when bros have just this innate love for their mate sort of thing, and it doesn't at any point imply sexuality, but just shows that there can be a love just as strong as a heterosexual one that can be shared amongst two people of the same sex. And at that point, the story talks about Tutanekai going to his father Whakaue and saying, "Ka roha atu au ki takuhua takatawhi ki a Tiki. I will have an undying love for my friend Tiki." And that's the only point in our historical recollections at this point that we know of that references the word takatawhi in a not a prehistorical or not a pre-colonial space, but still a time of that old world. And at that time, our scholars thought that would be the best term to maybe not represent, at that time it was to represent the LGBTQI Māori people who identify. And so that term has been coined to represent, you know, gay, lesbian, bi, trans, queer, aha, tūrane. But terms like Ira Rere and whakawahine, those are terms that have just come out in the recent sort of like last, or I guess early 2000s is when we started really looking at those terms, and I guess it's come with the desire from Māori to try and find a way to articulate a better way of identifying themselves.
Oh my gosh, I could look and listen to you all day.
All day,
You're so
honestly, you'll get
beautiful.
bored. Trust me, you'll get bored, babes.
Oh no, you're amazing and beautiful. I love how you articulate and communicate like
Stop trying to
all this
grease up for the
knowledge.
next point.
You won. You already got one. Okay. I'm just saying, like your
So
knowledge.
it is Tahu 1-0.
Okay, no, I'm just saying the way that you articulate yourself is so beautiful, and I'm excited.
It's taken me
Whatever,
a long
Tahu.
time to get there, so thank you.
Yeah, knowledge and growth, eh?
Yeah. Kapai. Is this second part though?
Yes.
Okay. Patai tuarua, and I'll list them if you don't have them, but list the non-cisgender terms, which means anything that isn't identified as male or female, for these Polynesian nations. So I'll list some of our Polynesian nations, and you've just got to come up with what you think or what you may know for that particular nation, with how they describe that person. Ka pai. So we've got Tahiti,
I don't know.
Samoa. We have Tonga, Cook Islands, Niue, Hawaii, Fiji.
This is great.
I just looked at how long this list is. Tuvalu and Kiribati.
No.
Oh, just a heads up, I just learned some of these terms yesterday.
Yeah, this is great.
Paiana,
This
if
is
you don't
great. I'm trying to think of MVP FAF.
Oh, smart.
I'm
smart,
like trying to
actual
think what
smart.
I think I know 3.
Damn it.
But I'm trying to think of.
Nah. No, 1-0. I already know I've got nothing.
I feel like I know the Cook Island one, but I can't. Oh, the Niue one is like, I think it's like something like that. I don't know. Anyway, we're gonna learn. We're gonna learn.
Kapai. All right, let's do the reveal.
Okay.
You go first, Tahu.
I only know Whawhawhine.
Yeah.
Kapai.
And
Wait, which nation is that from?
I've just written like this because I've got lost in the names.
Yeah.
And then I went Takatapui for Tahiti and Cook Islands and Hawaii.
Beautiful.
Nice.
Who knows?
Who knows?
They have pretty similar deals.
They do. They do. Yeah,
So
that's
I was
so
hoping
true.
it was going to be the same.
So for Samoa, Whawhawhine, for Tonga, Leiti. But I know that some people say whakaleiti, but I know from the Leiti community in Tonga that to whakaleiti is to act like a woman.
Yeah.
So instead of, so a leiti is more preferred, although some people say whakaleiti. Anyway, so the point, I think Niue is like tama something. I don't know if that's right, or that could be Cook Islands. I feel like I was like, I think it's around that.
Kapai.
And then the only other one I knew is for Hawaii is mahu.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Sure.
Sorry about you. Yes.
I was trying to think of
You're
anything
actually
bad.
on. That was probably the best way of like, what is it? Process of elimination.
Here we go.
So yeah, Tahiti have Rai.
Sure.
Okay.
Samoa Whawhawhine, Tonga Leiti, and yeah, I prefer not to call my Leiti sisters Whakaleiti because
I
I
love
just
that.
feel like it does, even though the I guess the definition is to in the manner of,
Yeah.
it still doesn't resonate, I guess, with our
Absolutely.
sisters.
Yeah.
So we're like, yes, he wahine Leiti.
Yeah.
Cook Islands, Akavaine.
Oh, that's it. I was like,
Sure.
I
Yeah,
was-
you're on, but you were right with Niue is Whawhawhine. Oh, Whawhawhine is Niue. Hawaii is Mahu. And I love the Mahu term because it more resonates with like that idea of two spirits, which is, I guess, a Native American idea of how they see it. Fiji, Vakasaliwalewa, and then Tuvalu and Kiribati have like little changes, but pretty much pina ine is sort of like how they describe it.
Oh, so Kiribati and Tuvalu are the same.
Similar, yeah. It's
similar,
just
right.
one has Tuvalu have pina with a P, and then Kiribati is pina.
Right. Cool.
You are on though. You knew more than me before I came into this business, and I've been J for ages.
I'm Tongan, so I knew the Leiti, and obviously when you're Tongan, you know stuff about Samoa. So I knew Whawhawhine, but I also know that Whawhawhine also means to act like a woman.
Yeah.
But I think Whawhawhine, I've yet to hear any feedback about not liking that term.
yeah.
But whereas I know for Leiti, they don't like.
I think as long as we acknowledge the feminine aspect of that person.
Absolutely.
Because the fafa ends up being misconstrued or used as a weapon, but
It has.
then we got
you're
our
so
sisters who are reclaiming that. And
Exactly.
we're like, go on then.
Yeah, go off, sis.
Yeah.
Go off, sis. I
It's
love
so
it.
good. But yeah, it's so interesting. And then with Māori being takatapui, it's quite interesting that we've used that term to describe everyone out of those sexualities and genders, which I
right.
guess isn't really... Well, I always thought that terms like akavaine, mahu never really distinctly identified sexuality, just gender identity. Yeah.
And that's the thing is I feel like a lot of like for Pasifika languages, it's quite like new because we didn't have those things colonization, pre-European contact. Like it was just people.
Yeah.
So I think like that's like the
Totally.
new language. We're all still
Absolutely.
learning and trying to figure it out and find space. And I hope language grows.
Hard.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that'd be so cool.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
No, use it on. Far out.
Just to let you know, Tahu, that's one to me.
Yeah. 1-0.
Just
Costa.
to let you know.
Give us the tiebreaker.
Okay, kapai. All right. I love this. Last one, e Huama. Oh yeah, this is easy. Do you have to be non-binary or gender fluid to express masculine or feminine traits? Kind of goes into your yeah, nah, yeah.
No.
Oh, you are both winners.
Damn it.
Yes, you say no, yeah.
Damn it. No, I don't want to share.
Go on, someone say yes. Oh, that's so good. No, and that's totally agree. I totally agree. Like, I guess historically when we look at it, oh well, I can only speak from a Māori perspective, but in my research we've noticed that if anything, a lot of our men back in our olden world were more of the affectionate, nurturing nature.
Yeah.
And the only time they were ever ugly, violent or bad essentially was during warfare. And even the processes for them to come back into the pa, they had to go through a pure or a cleanse. So the woman would take them off to a particular puna or spring and go through this cleansing process to remove that mindset of violence and anger and war so that they can be reintegrated into their society and their iwi as the nurturing fathers that they are.
Yeah.
And it was more noticeable that the women were more on the mask side of things, especially during warfare because they were the ones who had to protect the pa when the men were away at war. So it was really, I think, in a Māori perspective, and if anything, across the Polynesian cultures, the genders were very balanced and across the board. And it wasn't like, females go and do the kai, men go out and, I don't know, hunt and gather. I really don't know what men do, but, they did all those things. But really it was a shared load and everyone did their thing and whatever their capabilities were, that's what they would do. So it was, I think, just the idea of gender, I guess, expression or identity is very colonial in our day-to-day sort of reality. But you're right, back in the day we didn't really have terms to describe, or we didn't need the terms to describe someone who was non-binary or gender fluid or just different from what I guess Western ideologies would see as the normal for our people. And even sexuality is also an interesting topic for our Polynesian cultures because sexuality was very fluid across the board, and if anything, sex, like the act of sex, was very much celebrated. We knew that there were reasons for it, which was procreation, to produce uri and descendants, but it also was for pleasure. And our society had moments where, if there was a manuhiri or a high chief that would visit your pa, you would send your non-binary or your fluid kids or teenagers or whatever, because sex and that was very open, but also it started at a very young age during kids' adolescence and through puberty. And so the idea of sex with the same gender wasn't really considered a taboo thing. It was just considered fulfilling your duty or fulfilling a duty or a responsibility to your people, which I love because I love sex. So it should be fine.
Absolutely. Fun. Do you think these conversations are becoming more openly discussed or more accessible to people?
I think our younger generations are definitely open to the idea of getting to know what it was like and being a bit more open about these conversations, but it is harder for our older generation, especially because they've been a particular way for so long. It is quite hard for them to sort of change a way of understanding or a way of accepting others, but ultimately they just need to remember it doesn't affect you directly. It's just the individual who chooses or lives the way that they can authentically do that way of living. And it can be, I guess people do think of it as a hostile sort of lifestyle to live in because they're not sure, they're worried about their safety and stuff. But ultimately, we don't expect you to be in front of us when we're getting hit with stones. It's more just love us and we'll be fine.
Yeah, love us. I love that.
Yeah. Sorry, that was really deep. Let's move on.
No, that's important.
But I also like we were talking about it was so fluid. Yeah. Especially sex.
Yeah.
Like, you listen to any of our wata and old haka, they were the horniest, our people.
And vulgar language. Oh my God. They were horny. Like, it was intense.
But we did things like public orgies, public tomo, having sex on the mara and in front of everyone.
Wow.
Things like those practices, obviously a bit hard to bring to modern society.
Because they'd be like, what the fuck?
Yeah, well, you'd be like, out of it. that's probably how deeply colonised we are, because our people used to do it. It must have been for a reason. We'll talk about that gender fluidity thing and how they had different roles. I like the how you talked about how, you know, there was kids that decided at that age where if they were fluid or not. But thinking back to some other historic kōrero like Wairaka, one of my tupuna, and where she actually says ka whakatāne au ia hau, like where she would take on the role of another gender. So they got to choose or even decide if it was needed that she can do that role as well. Which is pretty cool.
So
looking back at our whakapapa. And that's why there's been heaps of kōrero around as takatapu allowed and Māori and like that's just from an uneducated point of view, but like it's in all of our kōrero where where they were kaitiaki, they were people, they were our teachers, they were a massive role. So it's cool that we've uncanned this.
And I love that you have
kōrero.
stories. You know what I mean? Like you have real stories that you know goes back so further than before you. And I feel like that's so important to share to people because I find like a lot of people don't know about this. You know, when I work with young kids like Māori and Pasifika in particular, which obviously two very different communities, but like the similarities of how painful colonization has affected our cultures over time is that they just don't know. And like a lot of it comes through a certain point of view, which is like generations before you that just don't know either. So you're a product of your own reality and you just go with what the knowledge is. And I feel like these stories are so important to share.
Absolutely. I guess across for all of our Polynesian cultures, because all of us managed to maintain knowledge and mātauranga handed down, or generational knowledge and treasures through oratory, sort of historical recollections rather than the written word. So it is depicted in our waiata. It's even depicted in our whakairo and our carvings for our marae.
There's wahine that mau matora whakatoia.
Yes. Like, it's actually pretty, well, I think it's typical because I'm thinking, women rule the world. Like, sorry. But again, it's just that idea that I think Polynesian cultures just have this really innate understanding that there is a balance to everything. And we may not have to identify it as being specifically male or female, but it's a balance of consciousness, a balance of being. And, you know, when we look at like the scientific elements of your chromosomes and stuff, you're made up of both your mother and your father.
Exactly.
So everyone innately has that fluidity in them, biologically and naturally.
And also, like, when you think about hormones, we've all got these hormones. We just have different levels of it.
Absolutely.
And I think, like, when you know more, then you know more, and you're able to talk to it and really debunk these really violent, harmful myths that exist that people like to push out to people. And it's just let people live.
Ka aroha ki a rātou. Really feel for those ones who really have this negative sort of idea.
Closed-minded.
And I go, it must come from a really uneducated or uninformed place. And I'm like, love that for you. Do you? Just don't come near me and my friends.
Don't project it onto people. I feel like people don't have the ability to sit and be like, why am I projecting on this to someone? Because this is my stuff. I need to go back and have a think about it.
Just a little bit of self-reflection.
A little self-reflection.
Nice.
You know, with the term coming out, was there a point in your life where you did? And what are your thoughts now about that term that's been used for so long?
It's funny. My one of my really close friends, he believes, I'm trying to make sure I use the right pronouns, he believes that coming out is one of the bravest things anyone can ever do. But it's a shame that we even have to do that in a society. To have to state a way of being, or to make it as, you know, whenever people ask me like, how was it for you coming out? And I go, how was it for you coming out straight? And like the fact that you don't have to do that already shows that it kind of implies that there's something different from what you consider the norm, and that's okay. My coming out was a bit interesting. One of my friends, we were on a trip over in Hawaii for kura, and we were having cultural exchange with one of the high schools there. Anyways, later that evening we had a shared kai dinner, and later that evening I got caught by one of my school friends with another student from the other school. And I freaked out because I was thinking, I'm going to be outed and all this thing and all those types of ideas of like, holy shit, my life's going to be shit after this point. Because at that time, despite other people being openly gay in that kura and stuff, and even knowing that the group of people that I was with wouldn't be judgmental towards that type of way, it was just the fact of the act of coming out as if it was just a thing. And I was more fearful of coming out to my parents, let alone anyone at kura. So yeah, it was really interesting. But it was actually, the coming out part was fine. It was coming out to my parents and dealing with the aftermath after that. I had the fears of being, disowned and kicked out, all those things. Even though my parents are lovely people, I just had that idea. But it was more dealing with their mourning after that. So they pretty much mourned for 6 months for the son they thought they knew. Or had, and all the ideas and the hopes and all that shit, I'm going to have grandkids from you, and I'm like, I still can have kids, I just don't want to do it the traditional way. But then again, I've slept with wahine and I'm not mad at it either. So it's the idea and the having to own up to this idea that I've been hiding something for ages. But again, back then as a high school student, not having the articulation to be able to describe what I was or how I felt was probably the harder thing for me. Was just not being able to articulate it.
Yeah.
But it's fine. We move on, we grow.
Absolutely.
It's been long. I'm very old now, so our parents have come around. Still learning, but they're pretty amazing.
Earlier we asked for your pronouns, and it doesn't, no worries to you, eh?
Yeah. So I appreciate the idea of the importance that people see in having pronouns and being identified with the correct pronouns. But I guess just, again, that Māori perspective of not really having the need, or even in our language, we don't have, despite having wahine and tāne, our terms to describe each other are still genderless, like the term ia. Again, it's more genderless terms that I refer to. But I don't mind people calling me he, him, or she, her, they, them. But I guess if I have to choose one, I would prefer the term Ira Rere. So it's just, to describe our gender, but the rere being fluid. But then other people have, not misconstrued it, but other people have different ideas of what that could mean. Some people consider it being bi-gender, where you're, in one space very male and then the other time you're very female. So it's just, I reckon I get a bit overwhelmed with how many terms there are and how many terms you have to be mindful of. And that was one thing I noticed with all my straight, heterosexual, cisgendered whānau and friends. They would be so scared to try and connect with a non-binary or gender fluid or even trans people for the fear of mistaking their gender. And I was like, you can just call them by their name. That's fine. But I think, again, it's that Western ideology of what they think is the correct way of interacting with a human. But really, like you said, first and foremost, we are human.
Humans,
I love the perspective of Māori too, because we all have iratani, irawahine, and it just depends on which one's stronger, which one's showing.
Hard out. And then, like you say, with physical attributes, that doesn't really distinctly identify with the gender either, because both genders have facial hair, body hair. I've got a few female friends, born through and through female, who have lower voices than most of my guy friends. And it freaks me out. I'm going, you should be in the bass notes. For and they're going, no, Karea. Oh my God. I think just the idea of what we consider gender is still in that Western ideology, but I guess our authenticity comes through our cultural understanding, and so we're lucky to be Polynesian at Te Whānau.
Absolutely.
Karohaki ngā non-Polynesians. I don't want to speak specific.
I feel bad for you.
I don't want to call them out, because then I don't want Under the Whāriki to be like, declined, wrapped, sorry, he's got to finish here. So anyone who's not Polynesian, karoha. But
if you are,
but if you come from an indigenous culture, love you the most. Love you the most. But
relate to you the most.
Relate to. That's a better way. Not love you the most. Relate to you the most.
Well, you understand each other a little bit better. I know when I recently learned of a story in Tonga about a god we used to praise, which is Hikuleu, and they're the god of Bulotu. I'm not too sure if you're familiar with the story.
I've heard little snippets of it through some of my friends at oh my gosh, now I'm going to be so bad for forgetting that. Yes.
Oh my God, I love that.
Oh my
Someone you want to talk after.
Yeah.
Yes, we love the Manalangi crew.
Yeah.
Shout out to them. They're amazing and they do such incredible work.
Amazing.
And the survey's amazing. But so Boloto is the underworld and it's kind of a shared, pan-Pacific. So a lot of Fijians, Samoans, Tongans believe in it. And the god of Boloto is a god called Hikoleo. When I grew up, very Christian household, but Hikoleo was always a man. When they would talk about Hikoleo, was always a man. And then I went to university and they're like, no, sis, Hikoleo was a girl, is a woman. And I was like, we love to see it.
Yeah.
And then further on in my working experience, I found out that Hikoleo was neither man nor woman, but had this fluidity of their gender. But also they're a god, so why would they be so human to have a gender?
Absolutely.
What's this concept of gender? And I remember learning about this and being like, this is so important. And coming from a Tongan background, it's so conservative. And Christianity is just, it's grown into the soil now. It's so embedded into who we are. But hearing these stories, I'm like, this is what we should be learning is it's not necessarily that we want to go back. It's that we want to know what was back then.
Yeah.
And if I think about the Polynesia as a whole, European contact came in the 1800s. So we existed thousands of years.
Sometime,
So what did we believe? How did we feel? How did we connect? How did we, so all those things are so important. And I think about in your experience, what have you found has worked to connect people about this who may not know much? How have you had conversations with parents and families or with friends that don't know much and how to connect them to know that this is information and knowledge that we should all know, whether you identify in a very Western way of cisgendered or whatnot, these are the things we should know. How do you have those conversations?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely age demographic type vibes.
Right,
so,
right.
with your friends, always go in on the sex talk because they'll obviously listen and they'll be more interested to learn about how sexuality functioned in the old world. For old, I guess more for parents who are trying to support or be there for their children. I always just go back to, reminding them that they are a divine being in their self. And when tamariki are born, they're at the most purest form, that any human can be. They know no judgment, no fear. They are literally the purest form that we could possibly desire as human beings. But it's not until our own fears and projections onto them that sort of influence the way that they grow up in this world. So trying to remind them that despite our human connections and our human anatomy, we also have that ancestral and spiritual connectivity, where, like you said, there is no gender in our gods. It's more we characterise them. And, even if we use Ranginui and Papatūnuku as an example, Ranginui is always depicted or always illustrated as a very soft, sukilala, essentially, and always depicted crying. And, we don't really see men crying a lot openly. I think we are actually getting better now with our... with that idea of toxic masculinity. But I still don't think that for culturally our people don't actually have toxic masculinity. It's a culturally learned thing over generations.
Absolutely.
And it's easy to sort of identify you've just got toxic masculinity, but if anything, they've just got a lot of unlearning to do or decolonising but re-indigenising how they would try and understand their world. But even if we look at our taiao as a whole, plants, animals are gay when they need to be. They procreate with each other when it's a type of survival thing. So it's, I think, or when we talk about the kumara or oh my god,
kutai.
The kutai.
They change gender.
Kutai?
They change muscles.
Muscles. So gender fluidity, or I just think of it as survival essentially. Our whole makeup is around being able to adapt to our environment and whatever fits that society or environment. And then I guess for Māori, because Polynesian cultures, it's quite, from what I've read, a lot of them identify that those who are mahu or akavaine, whaawhawhine, they had roles in society where they would do their duties, looking after whoever, children, elderly people. But in terms of their talents and mātauranga, they were always teachers of waiata, hitori, dance, hula. and more mātauranga around the spiritual world, because they were considered to be the most connected to that spiritual realm, because they had, I guess, a more physical manifestation of fluidity of male and female. And in their societies, their role was to create balance. So if there was too much maleness happening, they'd come in with their feministness. And then if there was too many female, you know, everything, hormones, everything, just a lot. You know, takatapui or any of us who sort of identified as that would go in to sort of just balance it out again. And I think that's, all of us innately have that balance point. It's just, I guess, for Ira Rere or takatapui or any of those gender identities, we just are able a bit more to physically manifest that in a physical form and present that openly, hopefully.
Yeah.
Sols.
I'm like,
you're a genius.
I'm like sitting there like, yeah. You know what? It's so healing to have these conversations, because I feel like if you've grown up, which obviously we grew up in a society where it's so cis-normative, it's so heteronormative, and we haven't had access to our cultural knowledge. Yeah. So to have these conversations is like really important for us, because I think it makes us see that there's so much fluidity and that we're just so much more than just one thing as humans. Like we're complex and layered and all these beautiful things. I think about, I remember reading this story about, so this European guy had come, this dude came over to Aotearoa, and he would write and like observe Māori, and he would say how like he was so shocked to see that men would look after their children, and that women would go and hunt and go do things and be outside, and then you know that fathers wouldn't hit their kids. Like there was no physical discipline. That it was so sensitive. They were so sensitive and so inclined to share emotion and whatnot. And I remember reading this and being like, this is so, why are we teaching this in schools? Like the perceptions that like media can have, and all these violent, really negative connotations that are towards certain groups of people. How have you found like learning about this has helped you as an individual and provide healing and joy for you when knowing that there's so much knowledge out there that provides your visibility more?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if anything, it saved my life, kind of thing. I guess growing up at kura kaupapa and stuff, you know, lucky enough to be able to be immersed in te aho matua and kura kaupapa, and I guess having this sense of like identity being Māori, but I did at times still feel disconnected, or I felt like I didn't belong because there wasn't really any representation, or I didn't see myself in any other person or any other illustration in our cultural practices.
You were on the cusp, eh?
Yeah.
It's like the last generation where they didn't have a pere to look up to.
Hard out. So grateful for people like pere, and because I think you're absolutely right on our generation being that cusp, because the older generations who were takatapui and who were open definitely were not really loved or looked after or nurtured in their whānau or iwi. So they escaped to the cities to create their own whānau, to find a safe space for themselves. But now, you know, we've got our generation who are sort of breaking that disconnectivity to their old Māori, because a lot of takatapui who are older generations don't really have that same sort of niche and understanding and feeling of belonging. And that was me growing up at kura, and so I did start to think I didn't belong in my old Māori, but and I guess also because I was that different one against everyone else in kura, schooling for me wasn't the best either, like the bullying stuff. I mean, it's so different now that I look at it, because the bullying wasn't actually that bad, but back then it was very traumatic, and I guess it was more because I was experiencing, I guess, this type of hate, but not even they could articulate what it was, and neither could I. So I was like, fuck, they must be right. I must be a freak or a weirdo. And, you know, and it was the basic things like, oh, why do you always hang out with the girls? Why don't you want to come and play with the boys? And I go, because it's fucking boring. But obviously I couldn't say that then. It was just more, I just didn't feel comfortable being around the boys. But at the same time, it was still isolating, because not even the girls knew how to keep me amongst it all, because it was still different. So it's like, so going through high school and stuff, that was all whatever. But coming into university, and I did this whole like, I'm going to reinvent myself, this is a new chapter, all that shit. But then actually going into it like, okay, I'm going to really try and find out a bit more about what I could be or who I am.
Absolutely.
And just sort of, carried on, and thank goodness for those narratives and historical recollections, and there's very limited amounts.
Absolutely.
Because again, through colonisation, a lot of those were destroyed, but we're still able to sort of keep hope, be hopeful of our existence prior to colonial influences, because we need to, more so for the younger tamariki and mokopuna, because I just see them thriving and I see them coming through, and I'm just like, yeah, this is what I'm talking about.
I think it's trending the right way.
Yeah.
A better way than it was.
Yeah. And we are all our, like, not just with the gay thing or takatapui elements, but a lot of our things culturally are improving. Like, we are getting better. Still got a long way to go, but we are getting better, and I love that, because I love to be part of the crews that are wanting to, you know, sort of project that and really get it out there to the whānau, to the iwi.
I love that. And even wrapping back to your quote about your guys' underground type of thing.
Yeah.
We have like a similar type of place called Rarohinga in this realm. So it's still in this realm in Ranginui, because there's different heavens and stuff like that.
Yes.
But yeah, so Rarohinga, on the trip there, you meet you have to go through the last island before Rarohinga is called Poutererangi. Oh, don't quote me. But Poutererangi and Te Kuwatuata's there, who's a momo atua. He's the type of atua. He makes the judgment if you can come past or not, and he checks your pureness. Because this place, Rarohinga, is where the tūrehu live. That's the tangata of that place. And they're not gender specified either. They're just pure. And it's a place of love. It's a place of harmonious, like, just being, of just being. And that's a goal that we all see as the standard of where we can get to, because the tūrehu got there. So it's a good place to maybe strive for. And wrapping up on this kōrero, anywhere we can strive to, where do you think we start?
Good pātai. If anything, it's it's coming back to the whole sort of not wanting to make it a thing.
Sorry, my tummy's rumbling.
That's okay.
I'm hungry. Sorry, guys.
But you nearly did.
Put it out there. I'm hungry. I haven't had lunch yet. I'm sorry to interrupt.
I just called the rap. You're making this take longer.
I'm sorry. I'm just saying. I'm really hungry. Keep going. You're beautiful.
Fine.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to know you heard it.
No,
and
I did, but I was like, should I talk louder? So
No. Let the people know. We're feeling, our body's telling us what needs to happen.
Yes, kai. So basically, honestly, it's just showing that unconditional love. Love us the same. We don't want to be treated different or loved differently. But that's a journey for every individual, and they'll have their different experiences on how that happens. But in terms of our whānau who want to sort of help elevate ourselves to get to that point where we can be authentically ourselves, but first and foremost, always identifying that you are human, first and foremost, Māori or Indigenous or Polynesian. It's your contribution and your service to your people that comes first, not so much the individual. But our individuality does come out when it needs to.
Absolutely,
So,
that's beautiful.
ki kaha, kia maia, kia manawa nui.
And just be kind and love and be just nice people.
Just be a good fucking human.
Just be a good fucking human.
Please, and thank you.
Yes.
Place to finish, eh?
Yeah.
Love.
I love it. Thank you so
Love's
much.
the fucker
Paula.
too. Love's the start anyway.
Yeah.
If you can love, then you can try and move on.
Yeah.
Get somewhere,
Yeah, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you for the time.
Your knowledge and just your light. I'm just really grateful that we got to have this.
Yeah,
So
same.
excited.
Thank you both.
Beautiful.
Tēnā tātou.
Love it. All right, well, that's our episode here on Under the Whāriki with Tangaroa, the most, articulating, beautiful
Yeah, I don't know
soul.
why. I've never done this before. I've never speak good English. I don't know what's going on. It's the wairua, it's the vibe.
You're beautiful, e hoa, and love you all. See you later.
Nui te aroha.
Ka kite anō.